I had never imagined that one quiet morning at home could alter my perception of things. The house that day was almost eerily silent. Dad was gone on a business tour, and Helene, my stepmom, had taken that morning off for herself. I was in the living room, sprawled on the couch with my laptop, doing some catch-up work. The soft noise of the shower upstairs was running and reverberated in the otherwise quiet house. It was an ordinary, uneventful scene when suddenly I heard a faint noise coming up from the staircase. I looked up curious. Helene was coming down the stairs, wrapped in a huge, fluffy towel. Wet hair was clinging to her shoulders, and drops of water shone on her skin. She must have been in a rush since she hadn't seen me. "Good morning," I said nonchalantly, hoping I would get past the awkwardness before it had even begun. Helene stopped in her tracks, clearly surprised. "Oh, Lucas, I didn't know you were here." I smiled sheepishly, raising my laptop. "Working from home today." "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." She let out a short nervous laugh and tightened her towel around herself. "No problem, I just came downstairs to get my phone. I forgot it downstairs." With the last stair reached, an unexpected development happened. Her foot hit the edge of the rug and lost her balance. On an instant, the loose knot of the towel gave way, and she found herself sliding onto the floor. Time just then appeared to stand still. Helene gave a little gasp, immediately bending down to grab the towel, her face bright red. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, trying to wrap herself up again. I quickly turned away, feeling my face flush. For an instant, I had seen her, but I did my best to clear my mind of that image since it was embarrassing. I had never thought of her that way before. She had always been my father's wife, nothing more. But in that moment, everything shifted. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, still kneeling to pick up the towel and wrap herself again. "I didn't expect anyone to be here." "It's nothing," I murmured, still facing away, my heart pounding. "Really, it's not a big deal." She composed herself and spoke in a softer tone of voice the second time around. "Well, that was embarrassing," she continued, still visibly shaken. I nodded in agreement, my own body still filled with adrenaline. After several seconds of awkward silence, I turned to her again. She'd managed to grasp the towel to herself this time and looked worse off than I had ever seen her. "I think I should be more careful," she said, smiling, the cut in her voice revealing how embarrassed she was. I gave her a half smile, hoping to ease things. "It was just an accident," I said. Helene looked at me, holding my gaze for just that shade longer than normal. It was as if we both tried to downplay the incident, but the pause between us hung a little heavier than it should have. I just could not get the picture of her, the way she was before reaching for that towel. Everything was altered for the remainder of the day. There were still so many silent thoughts hanging in the air. Every time I saw her glance at me, her expression seemed more protective, her eyes searched mine as if she too were trying to figure out what manner of display there should be from this point forward. I did the same, every glance, every casual touch now carried more meaning. That evening, sitting on the couch after dinner, my mind was still disturbed by the weird happenings of the day. The evening had been pretty quiet, as Dad was still away and Helene had gone to her room much earlier than usual. I thought that would be the end of this strange day, much later when I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, let alone Helene. There was a slight hesitation before I opened the door. There she was, standing in the doorway, looking slightly nervous, but at the same time determined. "I hope I am not bothering you," she said softly, her voice practically uncertain. I stood there for a moment, taken aback by her visit. "No, it's fine." "What's going on?" Helene took a deep breath, her hands nervously playing with the hem of her robe. She seemed to weigh her words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened earlier," she began. "I just wanted to know if you were okay." Her words left me silent for a moment. Was I all right? How was I to answer even that? My head was muddled with thoughts that seemed to jumble over one another, feelings I had never felt, things I did not even know I could feel for her. "I'm fine," I finally managed to say, trying to sound as casual as possible, but my voice shook a little, belying my unease. I shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to continue. It was just unexpected, that's all. Helene nodded, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. I understand. It was an accident, but... She hesitated, took a step closer to me. It's just that things seem different now, don't they? I couldn't deny it. There was a palpable change between us, a tension, something unsaid yet powerful. I nodded slowly, my gaze locked with hers. Yes, it's true. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, the weight of our emotions. I didn't understand what was happening, how to feel, but standing here so near to her, the attraction seemed to pull us together. Helene took another step forward, her voice barely a whisper. Lucas, I think I do feel things that I don't understand either. Her tone was soft, helpless, like a confession from deep inside that weighed heavily upon her. I swallowed hard, the room seeming suddenly to shrink and the quiet more suffocating. I wanted to speak, but my voice seemed to catch at my throat. Instead, I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, and without thinking, reached out, my fingers brushing her arm, sending a shiver through both of us. She looked up at me, her expression uncertain but hopeful. I could see the conflict in her eyes, but also a silent desire, and that was enough. I leaned in before one of us could get cold feet, my lips gently meeting hers. It started soft, almost hesitant, only a light touch of the lips, but the instant our lips connected, something ignited, the spark was deep and undeniable. Helene's breath caught, and I felt her body release a tension against mine. The kiss deepened as she kissed me back, her arms going around me and pulling me into her. I replied in kind, my hands finding her waist, the temperature of her skin warm from beneath her robe. Every touch, every kiss erased a little more distance that was between us. The kiss deepened with each giving into emotions we had kept inside. It wasn't just a kiss, but it was an admission of some silent acknowledgement of something that had grown between us. Then reality sets in just as fast. We parted, panting, red-faced, our hearts racing. Je suis désolée, Helene whispered, her eyes wide with misgiving. I shook my head, still dazed by the ferocity of what had just occurred. Non, je ne le suis pas. We stood there for a moment, trying to fathom what we had just initiated, knowing full well that the path we were embarking on would be complex and unsure. But for now, this was all we had, this one connection that neither of us would or could dismiss. The silence between us had thickened immediately after the kiss, with everything unsaid hanging heavy upon our acceptance of it. Slowly, Helene stepped away from me, avoiding my eyes at first. I could see the uncertainty in her gaze, the same kind of vulnerability that had been there before. Her hand was shaking slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't expect this, she whispered, as if to say any more would be saying the wrong thing. I didn't expect any of this. I stepped backward, my heart still pounding in my chest. What had just happened? What was happening? I had kissed her, and she had kissed me back. I gently placed my hands on her shoulders and began kissing her again, savoring the moment. It was impossible to deny the intensity of what we'd just shared, yet it all felt both so wrong and so right. It's okay, I finally said, my voice a little rough, still unable to fathom what I had done. I didn't expect it either, but apparently, we both needed it. Left with my thoughts, the events of the previous night replayed again and again in my brain. Every kiss, every touch, remembered. Sitting at the table for breakfast, I couldn't but wonder what would be next. Would things go back to normal, or were we about to continue deeper into this complicated road? It wasn't just a question of what had happened the night before that mattered, but of the feelings we had at this moment, the connection that had grown so gradually between us, something that couldn't be wiped out that easily. I heard steps coming towards my room and turned to see her. Helene was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She was as strikingly beautiful as ever, but there was something in the way she carried herself that had changed. She seemed more composed, though there was still something uncertain in her gaze. "Good morning," she said in a soft tone, her eyes finally meeting mine. Good morning, I stammered, attempting to be normal, even though my heart was still racing. The tension of the previous day was there, still hanging between us. I made some coffee, she said in a lighter voice. Want some? Yes, please, I said, getting up to grab a cup. I watched her moving around the kitchen, the sound of her light humming permeating the air. She was attempting to act as if all was well, but I could see her hands shake slightly as she poured the coffee. She was visibly nervous, just like me. She handed me a cup, and for some time, we stood opposite each other in silence, looking at each other. It was as if neither of us knew what to say, both were still trying to make sense of what happened. You're very quiet, she finally said, breaking the silence. Are you okay? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. Yes, I'm fine. It's just that I'm thinking about everything. I looked into her eyes, where exactly the same mix of confusion and desire stared back. And now? What do we do? Helene didn't answer right away. She set her cup down on the counter and moved toward me, stopping only a few feet away. She didn't break eye contact, and I knew there was a weight to her words before she said them. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. But I do know last night meant a lot more than maybe I anticipated, and am not able to simply act like it didn't. She paused for a moment, then finished, but I don't know how to progress from here. She was so honest that for a while, I didn't know what to say. The vulnerability in her voice, the sincerity, made it clear she was fighting the same feelings I was. Neither do I said softly. But I think we need to find a solution together. She nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and something else I couldn't quite place. But I knew then that we were on the same page, that we had crossed some line into new territory, and that all that was left to do now was figure out what came next. The days after that were filled with a different kind of tension. We never discussed the kiss again, but every moment shared felt different. Every look, every touch seemed charged with a new intensity. It was evident that this would not be something to just sweep under the rug, and our connection wouldn't permit it. Needless to say, this path ahead seemed to be a little rocky, but as I now turned to Helene, her stumbling over words, her staying near me a fraction longer than she needed to no matter what transpired, I knew I couldn't let go of my feelings. There was something there, something between us just too strong to ignore or even pretend wasn't there. Helene and I both knew we had our long road ahead of uncertainty and hard choices, but in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt something, namely, a certainty, an understanding that this was something worthy to be followed between her and me. And so we began to take small steps toward understanding what it was. There were no promises, no easy answers, but there was a bond between us that grew stronger. Whatever awaited us, we knew that we couldn't ignore it. But as that moment seemed to slide into an unstable peace, a noise broke the silence. A car door slammed outside, footsteps echoed on the porch. It was him, her husband, my father. Helene's eyes went wide with panic, and she suddenly pushed herself from me, a quick, sharp instinctive movement. It was not that she didn't want this far from it, but suddenly, it all seemed wrong. Too real, too dangerous. I can't, Helene whispered, her hands shaking as she reversed herself, her back against the cold wall of the hallway. Lucas didn't move, his heart racing in his chest. The pain of what he saw as a rebuff coursed through his veins, though it wasn't fear. She was scared. Scared of what this connection meant, scared of how much had changed between them in such a short time. Mom, Helene, any stop Pa, he said in a low tone, laced with desperation. He could see the turmoil in her eyes, the same longing he had felt when they kissed just moments ago. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. I can't, Helene whispered, her breath catching in her throat, before she shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. You don't understand, Lucas. If your father finds out, her words were cut off by the sound of the front door opening, and both of them froze, as if the world had turned upside down in just a second, the weight of reality falling upon them. She ran to the window, drew the curtain open a crack, and peered out at the driveway. Your father's here, she said, all high-strung, in a voice full of alarm. I have to go. For a moment, Lucas had nothing to say. It was as if everything was falling through his hands. That connection they had felt, so strong, so impossible to deny, had been the solution to everything and was now an obstacle. They had gone too far, become too involved, and the world outside their door was about to intrude on a situation neither of them could control. "I'm going to leave," Lucas murmured, his heart tightening as he took a step back, feeling the moment slipping away like sand between his fingers. But Helene didn't move, didn't say anything for a long moment. She stared at the door, her fingers clenched nervously at her sides. Torn, she was, between what was right and what she couldn't deny. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, the sound of footsteps drew closer, echoing down the hallway. Her husband was only a few steps away from the door. Her heart was racing, and she knew there wasn't time to explain, wasn't a chance to make it right, only time to cover it up, hide it in the past where it couldn't revisit them. "I'm going upstairs, to my room," Lucas whispered, barely audible, as he turned and headed toward the stairs. It felt like a betrayal, but there was no other choice, no other solution. Helene watched him leave, a feeling of despair settling in her chest. She wanted to reach out, to say something, to make it all right, but she couldn't, not yet, not now. The evening blurred on, the usual house sounds, but none of them could feign it was just another evening. Helene discussed with her husband the everyday things a couple usually talked about, but her mind was thousands of miles away. She couldn't avoid thinking about Lucas, what had happened, the kiss, and how he had looked at her, so longing. After dinner, she found herself alone in the kitchen, washing the dishes absent-mindedly. The night had fallen, peaceful, and the outside world remained quiet under the stars. Lost in her thoughts, she heard the soft creak of the door behind her. Turning, she saw Lucas in the doorway, his expression hard to read. "I know you're scared," he said softly, his voice low. "But we can't pretend this isn't real. What we feel, it's not going away. Not for me." Helene closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm scared, Lucas. I'm scared of what this could do to all of us, to you, to your father, to me." Lucas stepped towards her, his heart heavy. He reached out, gently brushing her cheek. "We can find a way," he murmured. "We can be careful. But we can't just ignore it." Her lips had quivered as she looked up at him, her breathing rapid. "I don't know how to fix this. How can I act as though everything is fine?" And Lucas watched her, his flesh responding to the moment, the weight of their mutual desire. All he wanted was to pull her into his arms and promise her that everything would be all right, but deep down he knew it would never be that simple. "I don't know either," he murmured, "but I know we can't turn our backs on what we share." Helene closed her eyes for a moment, turning her head slightly away. "I need time, Lucas," she said quietly. "I need to figure out what to do, what this means." And with that, she slowly moved away from him, her heart heavy with the decision she knew she had to make. As she headed towards the living room, Lucas remained standing in the kitchen, his heart torn between what he wanted and what was right. Days went by, week followed, and between them, this silence just grew in intensity. The house was no longer just a home, but a place charged with unspoken words, unexpressed feelings. Each time they crossed paths, electric tension lay in the air, yet once more neither of them knew where to start to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Helene tried to go about her routine, keeping busy, but her mind wandered back to Lucas, the moment they had shared. She was haunted, how he had kissed her, how she had responded to him. Consequences, though, were great, the stakes too high. Really, could she continue on this path with the damage it could cause? He couldn't escape, he couldn't tell himself it was just one of those moments that came and went. What had happened between them could never be undone. It had altered them both in ways they had no control over. Neither knew what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: as the tension grew between them, they knew they had to confront reality. Whether they could keep their distance or find some way to come together, time would tell.